Okay, forensic autopsy, I'm not gonna hit that too hard. Just a little bit about Idaho, the way it works in case you do stay in Idaho and decide to work here. Like I said, Idaho is a coroner system, so the coroners are all elected. Every county, 44 counties, each have their own elected coroner. Now, the coroners, obviously, anybody can run for coroner. You just have to be 18 years of age and a resident of that county. Okay, that's kind of crazy, right? Well, that's why it's up to voters to decide who they think should be qualified to do that job. It's not for myself or anything, but now what happens with all these coroners in Idaho is you've got each one of them. They don't have a forensic pathologist. That's your medical doctor that's going to do your autopsy. Ada County has the only full-time forensic pathologist in the state. And so each one of these coroners, they go out to a scene and they determine whether that body needs further examination by a medical professional, right? And so then they go ahead and they transport that body to Ada County. All the yellow ones we have contract with. So anytime someone dies in that part of the state, they automatically come to our office if it's going to be a case involving charges. So it's a homicide or an accident. And we get most of the suicides as well, unless it's real clear cut. The blue part of the state, that's our half pathologist, our part-time guy. He lives down in Pocatello, so when he's over here, we get southeastern Idaho as well. When he's over there, he kind of covers that for us. We don't deal with it. And then northern Idaho, if you guys from up north, you know, it's really hard to drive up down that road in the winter. So they take all theirs to the medical examiner's office over in Spokane. Okay. Okay, any questions? Let's do a brief overview of the coroner's office. Yeah.
You're saying that they pretty much have different areas and then they'll have to transport someone somewhere?
Yeah.
It's kind of confusing because I know somebody that died, it was like an unexpected death around Christmas time, but their funeral was only like a week later, so I don't know how they would be able to, I don't know if they travel.
It happens really fast. So say like we have a death up in Idaho County, like it's whatever, just say it's like a car accident, but there might be charges filed. They'll have that person here within 24 hours. So there's a big press on time because we want to get the decedents in and out as fast as possible because we don't want to delay the funeral. So that's why we work, 6 days a week. If it's a homicide, we work 7 days a week. We don't really ever take time off. So there's a fast turnaround. We try to get all cases in and out within 24 hours. Sometimes it's 48 hours, depending on if it's got a holiday or something like that. Okay. Any other questions? Okay. Let's talk a little bit about cause and manner of death because this really gets down to like the statistics of what you're talking about when you're going to talk about trends in violence. Okay. Mechanism, that's just physiological or biochemical processes that cause death. The example I like to do when I go through this is I say, okay, you got somebody who's shot in the chest, the bullet goes in, it perforates their aorta, and they bleed to death internally. Okay, that's the mechanism of death. They bleed to death inside their thoracic cavity. Okay, that doesn't mean anything for statistics, right? That would be, it just doesn't have the information like for vital stats to provide good statistical analysis for students who are coming up with their next graduate project. So instead what they do is they have you say the cause of death. So the cause of death is what caused someone to occur. In a case, the example I just gave, that would be the gunshot wound to the chest. That makes it a lot easier to aggregate data, so you can say, okay, in Idaho last year, 15 people died of gunshot wounds in the chest, or 25 people died of gunshot wounds. It's a lot more than that, though. I'll show you in a second. Okay, and then we have to classify them into one of 5 things. You got to have it's either going to be a natural death, an accidental death, a suicide, a homicide, or undetermined. Undetermined deaths, people ask about that a lot. It's not usually that we don't know what happened to the person. It's that we're having difficulty categorizing a death in one of the other 2. You see this a lot with overdoses. So you have someone who ODs, and maybe there's some hint that they might have been talking about suicide, but when we get their tox levels, we can look at the quantitative levels, it's not that high. And so it's like, well, did they really mean to OD, or did they just, accidentally OD? Sometimes we'll give the family the benefit of the doubt, and we'll rule that an undetermined death, and then that's just pens later for more information. If we have more information on later on, then it's easier to switch it. Okay, really matters with homicides. Okay, we have somebody who dies of really suspicious circumstances. Okay, but there's not quite enough to say homicide, then we can leave it undetermined, and then when new evidence comes to light down the road, we can reclassify that, because it's a lot easier to tell a jury we changed the death certificate from undetermined to homicide as opposed to accident to homicide. Okay, natural deaths, briefly, you know, everyone probably can think of a natural death, right? Heart attack, stroke, cancer. Now, again, just to kind of illustrate where like stats come from, these categories aren't as discrete as you think they might be, okay? So let's talk about like cirrhosis. So read the definition. Individual dies as a result of a natural disease process without significant influence of injury, drug toxicity, or significant environmental or non-natural factor. Okay, cirrhosis from excessive alcohol consumption. Who would call that a natural death? Okay, who would call that an accidental death? Suicide? No. Okay. Now, this is where it gets tricky. That's why you have to have people with a lot of medical background. Now, there's a difference between acute intoxication and chronic abuse. Okay. Chronic abuse causes things like cirrhosis, someone who's a methamphetamine user or a cocaine abuser, whatever, some sort of stimulant. They'll develop a thing called cardiomegaly where their heart gets too enlarged and eventually it's unable to beat efficiently and they could die from that. Okay, that's caused by abusing stimulants, but it's chronic, so those are natural deaths. So with someone who chronically abuses alcohol, those are natural deaths. Okay. Now that's different than a college student, and I'll use you guys as examples, who go out partying one night and you decide that you're gonna really hit it hard and you drink down, a half-gallon of vodka, and you stop breathing because it depresses your nervous system and you're dead the next day. Those are accidental deaths, okay? So there's a difference. And every kind of death you can argue it one way or the other. Accidental death, okay, falls, electrocutions, drownings, again, can be a little difficult. Okay, suicide, that's what we're really talking about today. Okay, some suicides are really straightforward, some aren't so straightforward, okay? So even though we try to keep the best stats as possible, you don't know if the information you get is 100% accurate. So you're always gonna kind of have to make sure your numbers are good when you're talking about sample size. I'm a big stats guy, so who has statistics training here? Yeah, you guys all know what I'm talking about. I need to talk about. Yeah. Okay, homicide. One death resulting from one person killing another. Okay, like Vicky talked about. That's a definition. Like homicide doesn't mean the same thing for everyone. Okay, for our office's perspective, all homicide means is that it's one person killed another person, and we consider it a medical definition. Okay, so gunshot wound, stabbing, strangulation, blunt force trauma. Okay, there you go. Homicide is medical diagnosis. Murder is decided by the court. Different types of homicide. We got criminal. There's different degrees. You guys are a bunch of CJ majors, all that. Justifiable, law enforcement, okay. Military, self-protection, and then excusable, okay. Now, again, these cases can get really, really complicated. Okay, Russian roulette, everybody knows what that is? Who says Russian roulette is always a suicide? Who says it's a suicide? Period. Who says it's always an accident? Oh, come on, raise your hands. You can have an opinion one way or the other. Like doctors argue about this, so I'm always interested. Like, if you had a suicide and you were trying to determine and put it into a manner of death, who would call it well, I just said suicide, but who would classify that as a suicide? Okay, so who would classify it as an accident? Okay, who would just say undetermined? Okay, so it's got all over the place. Okay, so this is where the scene investigation comes into play. This is why we send someone to the scene to actually talk to the people, try to get into the frame of mind of like what that person was thinking when they're playing Russian roulette, because you got a lot of really stupid people out there that do really, really stupid things, and just because they accidentally die doing them, it doesn't mean that they tried to kill them, they wanted to kill themselves. As we look, were they intoxicated? Did they have other reasons that were expressing suicidal ideation, that type of thing. Okay, so. Those can be a little bit difficult. It's kind of a slippery slope argument because, okay, you say, all right, it's a pretty dumb thing to put a gun to your head and you got 1 in 6 chance of pulling the trigger and dying. But what other activities do people engage in that are really risky? Like my favorite, I gotta get a clip of it, is that you guys all seem like the wingsuit guys, right? And now the big challenge is like, how close can you come to the ground? So they'll jump off the top of a mountain and there'll be like a little cliff here and then it drops off again. And they'll try to just skim the edge of that cliff to make it, and they'll have somebody stand with a video camera. Well, if one of those guys dies, I think you can make a legitimate argument that that's a suicide because they were taking an action that they knew was potentially lethal. right? Okay. Suicide by cop. Okay, law enforcement officer shows up at a scene, they got a report of a person with a gun, that person walks out, they either won't take their hand out of their pocket, or they pull something out of their pocket, they point at the police officer. What's gonna happen? Okay, is a police officer justified in doing that? Okay, is that a homicide or a suicide? Who says homicide? Who says suicide? Okay, back to that medical definition, those cases are all classified as homicides. It's justifiable, but it's still a homicide. Okay, doesn't matter what that person pulls out, they could pull out, I mean, we've had it happen here, I think one time it was a soldering iron. You know, it's like I've had at least one case I can remember that it was like a non-functioning firearm. I think it was a toy or something like that. Anyway, okay. All right, so I'm gonna spend a lot of time talking about suicide because this is what's happening in Idaho. This is just briefly 2012, and I don't even include numbers, the number of suicides compared to the number of homicides. Suicides are the issue in Idaho. We are really, really lucky. We have an extremely low homicide rate, but our suicide rate is out of control, okay? Okay. Now, before we really hit suicides, that was a little out of order, I apologize for that. We have to talk a little bit about like firearms in Idaho, okay? Because in Idaho, what do we love? Guns, we love guns, right? When I went and got my concealed weapons class, I was shocked that it was put on by the Ada County Sheriff's Office, but how pro-gun they were. You know, it's like, oh, it's good, you know, it's like, every Idaho should have a gun. That's part of our culture. You know, it's like, I grew up in Idaho, I grew up with guns, I don't have a problem with guns. Okay, now what that means is being part of our culture is there's a lot of guns per capita in Idaho. Okay, and you're gonna see how that plays out in our suicide rate and in our homicide rate. Okay, you know, people couldn't believe this, like when I was back in Baltimore at one of our meetings, and I was telling them that, oh yeah, in Idaho, you know, there's car dealerships where if you go buy a pickup truck, you get a gun to go with it. And they didn't believe that. They didn't think that that was possible. And for me, like, that's just normal, right? I didn't think that was weird when I heard those ads. I was like, oh, that's cool. You get a free rifle. You get a brand new pickup. So anyway. Okay, so here, yeah, 55% of Idaho households contain at least one firearm. That compares to 33% is the national average. Okay, so we're wide above. You know, we rank about 6, so, you know, that was one thing in the weapons class. They're saying, you know, we need to go out and buy more guns so we make sure that we can get in the top. We want to be #1 in something, right? Okay. Other states with high rates of ownership, you know, Wyoming, Alaska, Montana. What's kind of a common theme among those states? Hunting, yep, western states. Okay, West Virginia, that's kind of an oddball one in there, but you guys make your own conclusions. Okay, firearm-related deaths in Idaho. This is any firearm-related death. It doesn't have to be a homicide. It can be a homicide, a suicide. It can be law enforcement-related. It can be someone out accidentally hunting and they step over the fence and they actually shoot themselves with their shotgun. Okay, this is anytime someone dies of a death in Idaho. Overall, we're above the United States, except for in 2002 where we dipped a little bit below. But generally, Idaho has more people dying of firearms than most of the country. You know, for you guys with statistics, you know, there's lots of digging you can do into that to see exactly why. Okay, but it is statistically significant. Okay, rates of firearm deaths in Idaho. You know, this kind of Vicky kind of talked about this a little bit, but you know, when we have a firearm death, it's generally going to be male, right? Way more males than females die of firearms. Okay, way more males commit suicide with firearms. Okay, and we'll kind of get into this a little more detail. Okay, so from 2005 to 2009, 1.7 of all the deaths that occurred in Idaho were a result of firearms. Okay, of those, 83% were suicides. Okay, is anyone shocked by that stat? Surprised? What did you think it would be?
A lot lower than that.
Yeah. Now suicides.
20, maybe 35.
Yeah. So the thing with suicides is they're not reported in the media. Okay, because it's a courtesy the media provides the victim's family, right? Which is a good thing to do. There's also that any comm majors in here, they talk about the suicide effect. You start to publish suicides in the paper, and you will see an uptick of suicides because people start reading stories about suicide. All of a sudden they start thinking, they see that it gets attention. A lot of times suicides, that's part of it. They just want someone to pay attention to them. So you see an uptick. Okay, so it's good they don't report them, but like I said, it is an issue. Okay, only 11% were homicides, 3 were unintentional. Okay, that's just your hunting accidents. What did we just have happen in Meridian yesterday? Okay, somebody's showing, or over the weekend. Somebody goes home, they're showing their coworker their gun, it goes off, and they shoot them, right? It's an accident, probably. Right? Okay, 1.9% were legal intervention. You know, that's just people getting in confrontations with police. And then 0.5 were undetermined. Again, those undetermined, you know, they're kind of the oddball ones. Okay, there we go. As far as sex in Idaho, firearm deaths, this is again suicide and homicide combined, 87.3% of deaths. By firearm, we're going to be males. All you girls in the audience, you can read the sigh of relief. Okay, males, about 7 times more likely to be killed. Males, 8 times more likely to be killed by an unintentional discharge of a firearm than females. Does that mean that guys don't know how to handle guns? Women must know how to handle them better, right? No. Okay, it's going to vary depending on where you live in the state, right? So you look at the state, there's more firearm deaths up north, okay? Second would be southeastern Idaho and Ada County. Why is this? Does anyone have a guess why it looks like this? Like why is like our area have the fewer per capita firearm deaths?
It's not as rural, it's much more like
Yeah,
manufacturing.
it's a lot more populated. So we got big population centers here. Okay.
We have no restrictions here in Boise, like you can't have a gun out, it has to be concealed most of the time.
Okay.
Actually, it's open carry.
Yeah, it's generally though, it's like if you're gonna see someone walking around like open carrying, you'll probably see them more in rural areas.
Yeah.
You don't see it as much in cities. Okay. All right, so you know that might make something to do it. Like I said, it's really like statistics they're difficult because you can have a lot of lurking causes that aren't real apparent. Okay, what about race and ethnicity? Vicki talked very briefly about this, and she kind of hit it right on the head. Okay. 91% of all incidents involve non-white Hispanic residents. Why is that? Look at Idaho. It's just a population thing. So if you look at it, you could say, all right, you could like American Indians 15.7. That seems a lot higher than the lowest rate, which is Asian Pacific Islander 5.8. But when you do the stats, it's not statistically significant. Okay, because you're dealing with really small population size. And so like when you're, all you guys writing your research papers and stuff like that, just pay attention to things like that. You gotta know if it's significant or not. Okay, Idaho firearms in general, highest among males, 70 or older. That kind of fits with national trends. 48 per 100,000. Females, it's just a fraction of that. Okay. All right, let's go. Let's kind of actually get to the myths. All right, you want to do some facts and myths real quick? Yeah, let's do that since we're talking about suicide. Is that a fact or myth? Fact. Fact. Yeah. Okay. Males outnumber females. Suicides 4 to 1. Yeah. These are easy. Okay. Teenagers more likely to kill themselves. Fact. No. Myth. Older males. Okay. If there's no note, then it can't be a suicide. Myth. I'll screw it up because it's later, but what percentage of suicides actually leave notes?
Small.
Like 0.5.
Like what?
0.5.
No, it's bigger than that. It's like 20, 30. You see like 20 to 30. I don't want to give away my slide. I'm going to talk about later. Okay. Firearms are used in more suicides than homicides. I already blew that one, didn't I? Okay. Who's ever heard suicide's hereditary? It's a fact. Myth. Yeah. Okay. People who talk about suicide don't. Myth. People almost always are, in retrospect, we see this in our office all the time. there's some sign that that person was suicidal. They might not have recognized it at the time, but after the fact, we go back, we talk to the survivors, and they say, you know, I should have noticed this, if they were acting differently, they mentioned that they were feeling depressed, something. Okay, people talk about it, so pay attention. Okay, up to 50% of traffic accidents may be suicides. Yeah, that's scary. Really scary. So there's data out there that suggests that that's true. Some put it as high as 20 to 25%. Okay. No one's ever been driving down the road and have that impulse just to swerve into a car? Anyone ever have that? You talk to people, some people have that.
Not today.
And there's a certain percentage of suicides that are completely spontaneous. And if you want to watch a really, I can't remember if it's in this documentary or not, but it used to be on Netflix. It was called The Bridge, and they just sat and they filmed the Golden Gate Bridge in San Francisco, and they filmed people jumping off of it. And then they went back and they would talk to people who survived. A certain percentage of those people survived. And from that, they came up with a study, and a certain, I wish I would remember what it was, but it was like 10 to 20% of people who jumped off the bridge said that they were just walking up across the bridge. They'd never thought about suicide before. They might have had some little minor thing wrong going on in their life, and they just jumped off without any hesitation.